Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Counter-Strike Global Offensive for PC, Mac, PlayStation 3, and Xbox 360. I'm going to go ahead and get this out of the way at the beginning because people will probably comment on it, but there are two things I want to address here. First being that yes, the gameplay footage is against bots, and the simple reason for that is whenever I go online, I get this weird stuttering issue whenever people connect or disconnect. And it's just really annoying, so I wanted to spare you guys that. On second part, yes, the gameplay footage will be stuttering a bit, and that's because of the recording process. There is no other reason for it, and the game actually runs very, very well when I'm not recording. In fact, it runs around the 80 to 90 frames a second range for the most part, so just keep that in mind when you're watching this thing. This is a first-person shooter and the follow-up to Counter-Strike Source. It was released in August of this year, and it's interesting to note that the original plan of this game was to have cross-platform play between PC, Mac, and PlayStation 3, not just the PC and Mac together, which they still have. Now, obviously, you can't play cross-platform between console and PC now. They said it was for update frequency, but if you really think about it, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to have cross-platform multiplayer between PC and console right now. I mean, yes, you can plug in the USB keyboard and mouse to the PlayStation 3, and it will work, and you can actually play Counter-Strike Go with that. And you do get a very distinct advantage against people using the DualShock controller with that, or even the PlayStation Move, which you can also use. But even then, it would just be weird playing against console gamers unless they had that, and even then, it probably wouldn't be all that great. So, it's probably a better thing that they did scrap the whole cross-platform multiplayer there to begin with. But the real question isn't about that. It's more, is it enough to bring someone like me back to the franchise, where I played CS 1.6 and CSS, and I liked those up to a point, and then I got really tired of them because they got really samey. Is this enough to shake things up for me, or is it something for fans only, or is it something for new people only? Well, obviously they had to change up the graphics between this and Source, and that's not to say that Source looks bad. It's looking dated, of course, but it doesn't look bad. This one looks like a pretty standard console game, actually, and that's to be understandable. I mean, you gotta keep in mind it was co-released on consoles. But at the same time, I would have liked the PC version to have more graphics capabilities, to have better visuals, higher res textures, better modeling and animation, that sort of thing. But it's the same across all systems. Now granted, the PC version does have a surprisingly large amount of graphics options available to you, so you can really tweak things to your liking. And the PC porting itself is very good, but the textures are about medium res, so it's about what you'd expect from your typical console game. It still runs in the Source engine, so you still get a few issues from that. And one of the ones I really notice all the time is that whenever you load something, it tends to freeze up a little bit and then start spazzing for a while, and eventually it just works perfectly fine. So that's one thing I've noticed. I don't know if that happens on console, but it happens on my rig all the time for any Source game, not just this one. It has some pretty good environmental stuff going on. They did update all of the maps that they felt like updating for from 1.6 and Source into, of course, Go. And not all of them are quite the same as they used to be. I mean, they added in some things. There's not as much interactivity. For instance, in Counter-Strike Source, there were a lot of physics objects that you could just bump into and knock over and stuff like that. Those don't exist in Go. They're there, but you can't knock them over, you can't bounce them around or anything. They're just there. It's scenery. So they downplayed the physics. And that's probably a good thing because it increases your performance a little bit. As for the rest of the presentation, it's about average. The sound effects are, a lot of them sound derivative of the previous Counter-Strike games, which is not necessarily a bad thing, don't get me wrong. But I would have liked a little bit more differentiation between the various weapons so that they actually sound different as opposed to very, very slightly different. And some of the weapons just don't sound as beefy as they used to. I mean, when you had the AK-47, for instance, in 1.6 and Source, it sounded beefy. A little bit cheesy, of course, but still beefy. In this one, it just sounds like a kind of standard gun. So they could have done a little bit more with that. It's not that big a deal, though. There's nothing in the presentation that's particularly bad. One thing they did really improve on was actually the voice acting. I mean, it does have some of the cheesy stuff from the previous two Counter-Strike games, But at the same time, they threw in a lot of battle chatter. And it's actually really well done battle chatter. So you get this more dynamic feel from just the voice acting in general, and I'm very appreciative of that. But as far as the visuals go, it's about what I'd expect from a fairly high-end console game, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But it's not really the presentation that matters, it's the gameplay itself, and this is where things changed up quite a bit from the original Counter-Strike and, of course, Counter-Strike's source. Mostly in how it lays things out. Now, obviously the menus are fairly different, and that's just a different styling altogether, but they're easier to navigate now. And you'll notice right off the bat that there are 4 things that you can choose from. And these are Arms Race, Demolition, Classic Casual, and Classic Competitive. Now, the 2 classic things, the only thing that is different between casual and competitive is in competitive, you have to buy armor and defusal kits. In casual, they're just given to you at the start of a round. So that's really all that changes between them. There's also some other changes, like friendly fire is off in the casual mode, as well as team collisions, as in bumping into your teammates, and you'll actually stop moving and stuff like that. As well as in casual mode, you earn about 50% less money than you would in the normal mode. But both of those are the classic modes that you'd expect from Counter-Strike, which are, of course, the original Demolition mode and, of course, the Rescue mode. On maps that you would expect, like CS Office, DE Aztec, DE Dust, DE Dust 2, all that. So those are all still there. There aren't quite the maps that were in previous games, all brought together, of course, but they're the biggest ones that you'd expect, and that's pretty much what you'd expect from Counter-Strike, so not that big a deal. The 2 new modes, however, Arms Race and the new Demolition, are interesting spins. First off, Arms Race is just gun game, so that's included from the very beginning as opposed to having to be a mod, and so if you really liked gun game, then you will love Arms Race. It's that simple. It's literally the exact same thing. The difference being that when you get to your final tier, you get the golden knife, and you get a kill with the golden knife, and you've won. It's that simple. Other than that, it's exactly the same as normal gun game. But the new Demolition mode is on smaller maps, and instead of just going and doing the typical Demolition mode, you actually have to get kills to change your weapons. So they've done an interesting thing with that. They start you off with a really good weapon, which is, of course, if you're the CTs, it's an M4. If you're the Ts, it's an AK-47. And the more kills you get, the harder and harder your weapons get to use. So it almost punishes the better players by giving them these harder weapons to use, and sort of gives the newbies a fighting chance. But at the same time, I don't really think there are going to be all that many newbies playing this thing, so you have to wonder, what are they really going for here? And that's kind of the feeling I got with this game altogether. I mean, it felt like Counter-Strike, don't get me wrong, but they made a bunch of random changes that don't really make a whole lot of sense. Like, for instance, removing the suppressor option for the USP, which is no longer a USP, it's, I believe, a P2000, and the M4. You can't put suppressors on those anymore. In fact, there are no secondary fires of any kind except for the scope option for certain weapons, which is still there, of course. So they've changed that. They've added in some weapons. So there's, I believe, 25 weapons now. And the new ones are fairly well balanced, actually, for the most part. They are generally viable, but I don't see people using them all that much. Instead, they're opting for the tried and true stuff, which, of course, I do that too, but still, those options are there if you want to shake things up a little bit. And, of course, they've added in more options for a given weapon. Like, instead of just having one pump-action shotgun, they now have 2 per faction. And they also have 2 LMGs. So there's just things like that that you'll notice. But in general, the weapon balancing is well done. It's the same kind of thing you'd expect from Counter-Strike, where each weapon has its own recoil patterns that you'll have to get used to. Firing in short bursts is, of course, always a good thing. No iron sights, which, to be honest with you, I don't really care one way or the other about iron sights, but I would like the crosshair to be more easily noticeable. In certain maps, it's actually really hard to see the crosshair, so that's something to keep in mind. But another thing I would have liked is if they actually put a scope overlay for the AUG or the SIG assault rifles, because that just plain zoom in effect, it's okay, but I would have liked an overlay or something just for appearance's sake. Of course, that's not really game breaking or anything, so it's not that big a deal. But really, it's the exact same thing you'd expect. They just changed up menus. They have a radial menu now for the buy menu instead of the thing that you're used to. It's pretty easy to navigate for the most part. One thing to note, shotguns are now under the heavy section, so that's just something to keep in mind. They've simplified things a little bit. So what you get with CSGO is the core Counter-Strike experience, but with some additional changes, like, of course, adding in gun game as a standard mode as opposed to having to mod it. There's still the modability on PC. The community hasn't really latched onto it quite yet. I think it's too new for that. So it's also got a tutorial that just gives you the extreme basics on just how to do certain things in this game. And that's great for new players, but the thing is, I don't think there are going to be all that many new players playing this thing, except maybe on console. And I don't really think console players are going to really get into this thing. So it's kind of in a weird spot where, I mean, normal Counter-Strike players will play it and be like, yeah, this is exactly what I expect from Counter-Strike. There's some weird things here and there that could be ironed out through patching or something like that, but for the most part, it plays like what you'd expect from Counter-Strike. In fact, it plays a little bit more like the original Counter-Strike than it does the follow-up, which was Source. So if you wanted something that looks better than CS 1.6, but wasn't quite as glitchy as Source was, then this is the game for you. If you want something that's fairly well balanced, it's a decent game, but it's nothing that's particularly modern per se, because this is definitely not a very modern first-person shooter, then this is the game for you. But the thing is, I played CS 1.6 and I played CSS, and I got tired of them very quickly, and they wear thin pretty quickly because there's not a lot you can do. And they tried to remedy this in, of course, CSGO, but I've played it all before. So for someone like me, where you're just tired of Counter-Strike, you want to avoid this one. If you're a fan of it, then you might want to pick it up. If you're looking to get into Counter-Strike, but you never wanted to get into 1.6 or Source, then this is a good one to get into because it's pretty newbie-friendly. I mean, it's still brutal when you go online and you find all sorts of crazy good players and everything. But it's definitely Counter-Strike, and it's accessible, yet still retains everything that made Counter-Strike the original good. So I can't really say that it's a bad game, but at the same time, I'm just tired of it. So, also keeping in mind the price point being $15 US, this is actually a pretty good deal, especially if you haven't played the original Counter-Strike or Counter-Strike Source before. So, I recommend it to new people to the franchise. I recommend it to diehard fans of the franchise. But if you're like me and you're not a huge fan of Counter-Strike or you're just tired of it, then you'll probably want to stay away from it. So, that's why I give this a 3 out of 5. Thanks for watching.